in the fuel. So we've got a lot of documented cases of this. But TCP has been known to be a neurotoxin going back to Prohibition, when it was used in an additive to basically spike moonshine, an additive called Ginger Jake, and 30,000 people across the United States died from ingesting that particular compound. It's the same compound that is found in this fuel additive.
And I go back to the issue of going after good whistleblowers. They're going after journalists. I mean, this is like something out of a Stalinistic purge. And I do agree with you that this stuff is getting worse because they're going after whistleblowers. But my question is, what has changed in the ruling class that they don't care if the reactors melt down in Fukushima? They don't care if their kids get cancer. They don't care if the GMO is hurting them as well. They don't care if generals are breathing DU, just like the enlisted people are. It's like there's a total disconnect more and more with reality, not just with the general public, but with the social engineers themselves.
Well, these people absolutely have no concern for individuals, for people or for wildlife. They just continued. They just have a philosophy that people and other living things are expendable. But when it comes to them, of course, they live a very good life behind their gated communities and while they're on their yachts and whatnot. I think it's just I think it's just what we saw in France before the French Revolution. The French royal family had no idea how bad things were out in the outside the palace in Versailles, just like the Russian royal family had absolutely no clue as to how bad it was in the steppes of Russia. I think we have the same mentality here with the one percenters. They absolutely have no clue as to what the effect of their policies is.
But melting down reactors, just because they have the FDA say it's safe now to have 1,000 times, you know, this isotope or 200 and something times the other, just because they wave a magic wand doesn't make it okay. And just because they wave a magic wand and make people serve 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 tours, you know, this is going to blow back on them. It already is, just like Marie Antoinette and the let them eat cake statement. You're absolutely right. Speaking of that, BP, we now, a couple years after, have a good image of what happened. I want you to recap that. I know you spent a lot of time in the region. You just spent more time actually out in the Gulf and in the Caribbean as part of an investigation. But, you know, it turned out that BP ordered from Houston, and I'm not saying Halliburton's good either, but the point is, ordered Halliburton and the other operators, you know, 3 different ones there together, to dump water in, mixed in, and they said, well, this is going to explode. They said, you know what, we're going to save money. We say it's going to be okay, even though all the engineers said it's going to explode. And there was a fist fight, we now learn, on board over this, people saying you can't do this. So, again, total greed, total delusion that if they can boost profits, they're going to get a bonus. And then just push the oil to the bottom, use millions of gallons of core exit, lie about that, fishermen out of work, make them go work, breathing the stuff. I mean, it's so sick. And now it's even in mainstream news, but you got some of your own photos of the mutations and death in the Gulf of Mexico, but they're still serving this on tables out there. Break down your investigation. We'll be showing some of these photos that you took, and tell us where you took those.
Yeah, I was down in Grand Isle, Louisiana, which is was once a huge seafood processing town. 1 out of every 20 shrimp now being caught in the Gulf of Mexico have these grotesque-looking tumors on them. The tar balls are still washing ashore on the beach at Grand Isle. What BP does, though, at 3 o'clock every morning during the darkness, they bring these plows out on the beach, and they go down the 7 miles of beach at Grand Isle, and they till the sand. So what they're doing is blending the tar balls in with the sand. Now, I walked the beach, and I could just tell from walking on the sand that it felt oily. They also pick up all the dead marine mammals and fish and birds that wash ashore. So while I was down there, and while the mainstream media that was down there 2 years ago, they were up here yucking it up at the annual White House Correspondents' Dinner. You didn't see Brian Williams or Anderson Cooper or any of these clowns down in Grand Isle 2 years later. But the situation is now worse because the Corexit and the oil has now affected the food chain. It takes about 2 to 5 years for it to affect the food chain. Now we see the mutations in the shrimp and in the crabs and in the fish. Eyeless shrimp, these shrimp that I took pictures of with these huge tumors, and crabs born without claws, and fish with huge lesions on the side, on their sides. And so basically the seafood industry in Louisiana, which supplied most of the seafood to the rest of the country, is for all purposes dead and dying. BP is now offering settlements, including to one of the biggest seafood companies in Grand Isle, the Blanchard Seafood. They're only offering about $25 million, but this was worth much more. This is a third generation company, third generation of Cajuns, the people who live in that area. And all BP's interested in doing is paying out the least amount of money they can. Even some of the laboratory results, they've tested some of the seafood in places like LSU and Tulane, but BP has apparently gotten to some of these universities with, grants, money. So you can't believe even some of the laboratory test results now. They're running ads up here in the north and in the Midwest saying, come on down to the Gulf, Florida, Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, the seafood's great, the beaches are fine. That's not the case. 2 years later, after the Deepwater Horizon, the situation is not the same, it's worse because of the food chain now being affected by the Corexit and the oil.
And again, this ties into the scientist openly saying that if reactor 4 goes, which it looks like it may, it's leaning towards that. It's at Fukushima a year plus into this, it'll be 85 times the amount of radiation released from Chernobyl. And people are like, well, what's the big deal? Well, European countries and the UN predict or estimate around 1 million people have died since '86 from cancers and other complications from that. Folks don't know, a hydrogen bomb or a bomb, the precursor, most of its radiation is dissipated, but it's still very serious. But with reactors, this is the dirtiest form, and it's just belching this stuff coming across the winds that blow directly onto North America, and their answer at the EPA and FDA is just say, hey, the radiation's okay. It's the same thing with BP. And these guys didn't even get in trouble. And it just shows the fact that they're totally disconnected from reality. Pre-2000, in America, we'd never put up with the TSA and all this. We put up with that. Now they've got Army reports out, training manuals. I want to get your take on this. Admitting, yeah, we're preparing for re-education camps in America, and even use the word re-education, and taking the political dissonance there and how to gag them and how to do all this stuff. I mean, it just gets more and more. I call it the twilight zoning of America.
Yeah. And the problem with the Justice Department is that they're charging this guy, Mr. Mix, for BP. He was a BP engineer with deleting some text messages and emails to his superiors where he was stating, look, there's much more oil coming out into the Gulf than what we're admitting to. And he deleted those, but who ordered him to delete those emails and text messages? So here we go. Now, in the past, they'll try to go after the low guy to try to flip him to go after the higher ups. But I've seen nothing from this Justice Department that indicates that's their strategy. It's a good prosecutorial strategy to do it, but we know that this Justice Department under Eric Holder is totally run by the oligarchs and the corporations and the vested interests. And I would be very, very surprised if we're going to see them, the Justice Department, try to flip Mr. Mix against people like Tony Hayward, who was, of course, down there saying he wanted to get his life back, when now everybody in the Gulf, their life is ruined.
Let's shift gears into the Justice Department. Is the Justice Department more corrupt now than all the other famous corrupt ones? Or is it just that we know more because of alternative journalists like yourself, INFOWARS.com, and others out there? Because We now know that Bush was involved in gun running operations as well. Of course, it's all about the narcotics trade control. But now we learn that Obama, it was hand grenades as well, that they did know, they did lie. And then you've got John Corzine caught lying, the head of the CME group. Duffy comes out. Their own people at MF Global admit he's lying. Of course he's lying. He's caught lying. Now it's admitted he was lying. He doesn't get in trouble. And the Daily Beast of all people, that's Newsweek. It's a Newsweek article at the Daily Beast. They are reporting on what we've known for a while, that there's this law firm that has all these former Justice Department people. That's where Holder was previously, where they are out of power as Democrats and they get back in power just like Republicans, that revolving door like Monsanto and the regulators, that the big Wall Street crooks just come and pay them money for their cases, and then the Justice Department drops the cases. Now, I mean, we know that's going on, but now it's in Newsweek, and I guess just like with John Corzine, it'll come out, no one will get in trouble, and that's just how it is. I mean, it's just like everything is so out in the open now that these are total crooks.
Well, I think the big difference, during Watergate, of course, the media did go after people like John Mitchell. But, compared to Eric Holder, John Mitchell's starting to look more like Oliver Wendell Holmes every day. But the journalists back then were a lot more aggressive. They also had people who were willing to leak out of the Justice Department. But with this current fear factor in Washington, every journalist will tell you here now that their sources are drying up left and right. My sources don't want to talk to me anymore. You got Jim Risen from the New York Times now facing a subpoena that the government kept alive after it was quashed in federal court. The Holder's Justice Department appealed it, and oral arguments begin in Richmond on May 18th. So you've got these efforts by the Justice Department to go after whistleblowers, charge them with violation of everything from the Espionage Act to all kinds of other laws, and active going after journalists, wiretapping them, threatening them with subpoenas before grand juries. That's what's different today. We didn't, maybe Nixon he thought about going after people like the New York Times and others back then, but he never really followed through because the system, as we heard, somewhat worked back then. And you
should see the media circle the wagons against Obama doing this. This is unprecedented. But instead, they're like, yeah, get him. I mean, it's fun to be part of the gang against the First Amendment. Let me ask you about this. What do you think about Breitbart's death? Now one of the coroners is dead. The key witness, the only person to see him die, has now disappeared. We know that it was going to be Bill Ayers info he was going to release, not the stuff they later released, tying into the re-education camp stuff. I mean, what's your investigation?
I